Okay, good afternoon. Welcome to Brussels. Welcome to the European Parliament. Today we're going to talk about China and more specifically about human rights in China. We will talk about Ilham Tohti, who's a Uyghur activist who's been sentenced to jail a few years ago. We are very glad to have 4 people to talk about this today. First, on my right, I have Editor Yaxue. You're based in the US and you're the editor of ChinaChange.org, which is a source of information on China and rule of law issues and civil society and democracy in China. We have also Marie Holzman, who's coming from France. She's a sinologist, author, translator, and she's one of the founders of the Ilham Tohti initiative, which we're going to talk about. Enver Chan on my left. You're an ethnic Uyghur, but you've been living in Germany for 40 years now. You're the president and also a founder of this Ilham Tohti initiative. And you're a human rights activist for Uyghurs. And Lucia Parrucci on my right, who's coming from Italy. And she is Advocacy Officer at UNPO. UNPO stands for Unrepresented Nations and People's Organization. So very simply, I will start with a question to you. Can you tell us why you're here, basically, and who Ilham Tohti is, and why did you come to Brussels to talk about this?
Okay. You may or may not know that last year, 43 MEPs in this building nominated Ilham Tohti for the Sahara Price. And we come back this year to have another round of talk to follow up on our advocacy on Ilham Tohti, his work and his current condition. And we also want to speak a little bit about One Belt, One Road with the parliamentarians because
One Belt, One Road, which is the new project of the Chinese president.
Yes, a very ambitious westward development project. Mm-hmm. And because it is related to the Ilham Tohti issue and the Uyghur issue and human rights issue in general.
Maybe first, can you tell us a little more about this Ilham Tohti himself? I mean, who is he and what happened to him? Can you elaborate a little bit about him?
Ilham Tohti is in his late 40s. He is one of very few Uyghur intellectuals living in Beijing. He, over the last 20 years, starting from mid-90s, he's an academic. He wrote and he published. He ran a website. Altogether, he promoted the political, cultural, economic, and religious rights of the Uyghur people.
Maybe to make things clear, we should specify that Uyghur people are living in the western part of China, in a region called Xinjiang, and it is an autonomous region, so it's a very specific status. I mean, I think it has to be clarified. So he's coming from this region, but he's been living in Beijing for a while now.
Yes, he is, in his youth, when he was 16, he was selected because of his brilliance. He was selected to study in Beijing, which is a long-standing tradition. The Chinese government to choose the brightest youth from Uyghurs, from Tibetans, and the other ethnicities, bring them to Beijing to get educated. So they gain advanced education and they become elites of their people.
So what happened? I mean, it was supposed to be on a
he's supposed to be he's supposed to be on the rising and enjoy elite life, and but he decided that his people, if as one of the very few members of the elite, he felt like if I don't speak out for my people, who will? So he spoke out for 2 decades. At first, the punishment was light. like suspension from a classroom, short suspensions, and barring from publications, house arrest, police talk, and then eventually they detained him
what
in
did
January.
he speak about? I mean, what was wrong in the things he was saying?
Yeah, well, what he saw, he's an economist. He is by training economist. What he saw in Xinjiang area, the 10 million Uyghurs, over the last 3 decades, especially the last 2 decades, that his people was economically, culturally marginalized by large influx of Chinese people. And he talked about the unemployment of Uyghur youth, for example. He talked about the limits on Uyghurs practicing their religion, which is a brand of Muslim.
It went beyond economics. It was a broader issue, right? It was not focusing only on economics.
No. But
so
the economy,
happened?
he saw economy, the marginalization of Uyghurs' political, economic life as a source, one of the many sources of their discontent.
Okay. And then what happened to him? I mean, he was sentenced for what and to...
Yeah, so eventually the punishment and suppression built up over the years. So in January 2014, he was arrested. In September 2014, he was sentenced to life.
Okay, life in prison. And I mean, do we have any news coming from him? I mean, what's happening to him in jail? Can he talk to people? Can he meet people? I mean, what kind of news do we have from him?
Well, unfortunately, the news about Ilham Tohti is that we don't have news. I think the Chinese government takes systematic measures to silence him, to silence any news, any reports about him, so that the outside world does not hear about him anymore. Once you don't hear about someone, you stop paying attention. So that is the plan. And the measures the Chinese government uses to isolate news about Ilham Tohti, including by law, Ilham Tohti should be imprisoned in Beijing. He's a resident of a Beijing city, but they put him thousands of miles away in Urumqi. His wife and the 2 young boys can only visit him once every year. So that's a very inhumane situation. Also, by law, he should be able to receive 1 visit each month. But he's receiving 1 visit every 3 months by his brothers in Xinjiang. And then when the relatives, whether it's his wife or his brothers, visited him from in prison, they were warned and threatened not to talk about it. They did not give interviews. So we don't have any report. In earlier days, we know that he was in solitary confinement. We don't know the current situation. Looks like he was in relatively healthy physical condition. And he also couldn't write letters and receive letters. And that is a basic right of Chinese prisoners.
So you really mean that a special treatment is targeted at him really specifically? I mean,
yes. He was treated as a special prisoner the news about whom must be cut off from the world.
Okay. Maybe I will turn to Marie Holzman, because I would like to have your views on this. I mean, is it really specific to Ilham Tohti? What we have just said, that there is a special treatment. So is it a very isolated case, or are there other such cases in China nowadays?
Well, every case, in a way, is specific. Every jail has its own ways of treating prisoners. We know some prisons are particularly harsh and use very violent means, and others are not, and we don't know why. But, for example, the case of Liu Xiaobo is vaguely similar to the one of Ilham Tohti, because Liu Xiaobo is the only Nobel Peace Prize in the world to be in jail, and everybody has forgotten his name. And why? It's like Yaxue said, because we have no news. At one point, Lucia did say a few things. I think she must have been warned never to say anything. His wife, excuse me. Yes. She is under residence detention. She cannot see anybody. She cannot talk to anybody. And because of that, we don't know how he is. We do know that at one point, friends of Lucia tried to go and visit her, although she is under detention at home, and she is under guards of policemen. After these people came to see her, the brother of Lucia got arrested and was sentenced to 11 years in jail, just like her husband, Liu Xiaobo. So you see, the families are under tremendous pressure to keep silent. In the case of Liu Xiaobo, what is interesting, the only little things that we have heard are positive. He is allowed to cultivate his own vegetables in a little yard in front of his cell, and he receives books to read from his wife. So that kind of positive, soft information we get. The rest, we know nothing.
And the kind of treatment you're talking about, which are very harsh, I mean, has it always been the case in China since a few decades, or is it a new trend? Or?
Well, I've been sort of following the situation of various political prisoners since 1979, the first famous arrests, such as Wei Jingsheng. For 10 years, I really didn't know whether Wei Jingsheng was alive or not. His family had also been warned, if you say anything, no more visits. And Wei Jingsheng, who is born in Beijing, had the Beijing residency, was sent off to Qinghai, which is really far. It's as far as Urumqi. And his family, same thing, could only visit him once a year. But we never knew until Wei Jingsheng came out in '93, and I went and visited him, and he told me about everything that had happened during all these years. Until that time, we didn't know. We didn't know where he was. We didn't know what had happened to him. And when he finally came out of China, after having spent in all 18 years in jail, which is really a considerable time, he told me that he had only received one letter from his family in 18 years.
Okay, so that means this kind of very harsh treatment is specifically for people considered extremely dangerous.
Famous political
especially prominent political prisoners. Okay. In this case, both Wei Jingsheng and Ilham Tohti are very prominent political prisoners.
Wei Jingsheng was awarded the European Union Sahara Price
in 1996.
Okay. Yeah. We will come back to this Sakharov Prize a bit later. I would like to ask Enver Chan a very simple question, although it may take some time to reply. But I mean, obviously the Chinese government is very tough with Ilham Tohti, and that means that they are extremely tough about Xinjiang in general. So can you tell us why is it the case? Why is Beijing so much worried and so tough about Xinjiang?
Yes. First of all, Xinjiang, as China refers to the region, means new territory, new frontier. So in the history, it was independent, it was kingdom, so on, and there were many gives and takes off between China and so eventually end of 18th century, China established full control over this territory. And Uyghurs call their country East Turkestan, meaning eastern part of the territory of the land where Turkic people live. And they declared their independence last century in 1933, in 1944, twice their independence. Those independence were very short-lived, so at that time superpowers collaborated, Soviet Union, China, and so brought to the end these republics. As to your question, why the Chinese communist regime in Beijing is so tough against Uyghurs, there are political, strategic, and economic reasons for that.
Okay.
Since 1949 up to early 90s, in the 40 years, there have been many campaigns, including so-called Cultural Revolution in all of China and in a severe form in East Turkestan, to crush any kind of dissent, which meant independence movement, nationalistic movement, religious movement, cultural survival, things like that. So they were purged. So actually, my father left the country 1960, escaping to become a Communist Party member or to be sent to rural areas for re-education. Okay. This is a very simple example. And Chinese, in between, they moved millions of Han Chinese, resettled there.
So Han Chinese, which is the majority of
right now,
ethnic
it is
majority.
I am a Han Chinese. Majority of the population now, and they established so-called Xinjiang Construction Corporation, which is in Chinese, what's called in Chinese, Bintuan. And there are more than 2 million, if I'm not wrong right now. There are big industries, agricultural industries, and some of them are armed, plus the armed forces. And
so what you mean is that they took over Xinjiang economically?
Economically, politically. So we are now in a position of minority.
Let me jump in to explain what is Bintuan. It's a very important social and economic structure only designed for Xinjiang area. So Bin means military, soldiers. Tuan means corp. So what it is, it's a political economic organization, self-contained, with a military kind of a management style to engage in agricultural and the other light industrial production. So each Bintuan can have thousands up to 10,000 large units. So they are
workers. It's a number of workers, right?
Yeah, in terms of workers, and they are settlers, Han settlers in cities. They build new cities like Shihezi, complete a Bintuan city. It's a city. And then you have other cities all over Xinjiang. Okay. You have these Bintuan. They formed the backbone of Xinjiang's economy. So Xinjiang's economy was over the 60 years of communist rule was built on the Bintuan structure.
Okay.
And mostly they're Han. They actually sort of exclude the Uyghurs.
I want to ask one more question. From what I understand, things are getting worse. I mean, for Xinjiang during the last, say, 10 years or maybe more. So why is it so? I mean,
so I was coming to that.
Yes.
I was coming just to that. That the Chinese government thought, after 40 years of repression and purge, that the will of the Uyghurs to re-establish their independence is broken. That was what their conviction. Mm-hmm. But after the collapse of Soviet Union, and that the independent states emerged in neighboring Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, and so the Uyghurs hope again to re-establish their independence. They was there.
Okay.
And they acted accordingly, hoping the spring for them will also come. So that's one reason. And the second reason is a strategic region. East Turkestan, the Uyghur land, is positioned in the heart of Central Asia. it was historically very important at the crossroads of the historic of the Silk Road, and
so the development of China, I guess, makes this region even more strategic now, because oil is
of course
oil and gas is transiting through.
It was in the history so important that at the beginning of the 20th century, 1905, China, Britain, and Russia agreed upon the boundaries of influence. So East Turkestan was given to the China's area of influence. So north was to the Russia, and south, the Indian subcontinent was the area of influence of Britain. This is in the history. So also in 1946, in so-called after the war, the Yalta Agreement, in the Yalta Agreement, East Turkestan was again given to China. In return, Soviet Union took Outer Mongolia for his area of influence. Okay. So they traded. They traded. And economically, the Uyghur land is very rich, as you said, for, natural resources like uranium, gold, natural gas, and natural gas, uranium, and oil.
Okay.
And oil. Okay. And plus, whole Chinese pipelines from Central Asia, Caspian Sea, Kazakhstan, which goes through to mainland China, to the East China, pass through East Turkestan. And the last thing about this will be that all this is for Chinese government enough to fear or to crack down more heavily on any kind of Uyghur descent. And Ilham Tohti was the smartest one, and he said, please, just rule of law, implement your autonomy law, and they thought he is the most clever one. We have to silence him forever. Thank you.
Okay, maybe Marie Holzman, I have a broader question. I mean, obviously, the human rights issues are getting more and more difficult to address with China, because China's power is growing, and governments around the world don't really dare to mention this explicitly. So how can we deal with China as a European Union?
Yes, it is difficult to deal with China, because now China has a lot of money and it's spreading that money all around the planet. But on the other hand, we see that China is one of the worst polluters in the world. We see that China is the biggest dictatorship in the world. We see that it suppresses its citizens without any consideration for their freedom of thought, freedom of religion, freedom of movement, whatever. And so this has become a dangerous country for the planet, for the environment, and for our own democratic system. Why is it dangerous? Because everybody says China is efficient. It's easy to be efficient if you're in a dictatorship and if you completely neglect environment and human rights. So this is a matter of principle. EU stands for peace, freedom, equality, human rights. If we don't stand up to China, then China will get our skins.
But it did not really happen during the last decade. I mean, I was based in China, and every time we had a president from Europe coming, he was playing solo. So
right, but now China has become the strongest commercial power in the world, and we are having nationalist, populist movements coming up, far right, conservative or even retrograde systems trying to emerge. So it's a time to react. If we react as a body, and if we reaffirm our convictions, that is, that we believe in peace, human rights, democracy, etc., we have a unique partner with China, because China only understands strength and force. If we tell China, you can do this only if you free Ilham Tohti, you can do that only if you free Liu Xiaobo, it will start thinking, they're not as weak as we thought they were. oh, maybe we have to make a little effort.
So this
maybe
is the
give
Chinese
a little
mindset.
concession.
That's
the
what
Chinese mindset. If you give everything without a fight, you're weak. If you're weak, we just suppress. We go on and we squash you.
Can I jump in to say
Very briefly, we have
Yeah,
little
very
time.
Yes. The last 3 decades during China's opening up and reform, the West sort of embraced the narrative that is, if we help China to develop, if China becomes economically rich,
it will open up politically.
It will open up politically. China will want to be a democracy. And now what we get is not, we are at the end. China now is rich. China now has a middle class, and China is moving away from democracy and the universal values. And what we have now is a new monster. We have never before. This new monster has all the economic powers to control its people internally and export the censorship and its economic powers. So what the free world has to come to a point, I think we're approaching, I hope, we're approaching a point where the free world has to confront this new monster, because you either confront it or you get swallowed by it.
Okay. Since we only have a few minutes left, I think we need to come back to the core issue today, which is Ilham Tohti. Enver Chan, can you briefly explain to me what this Ilham Tohti initiative is about? Why did you create this, and what do you do with it?
Yes, we have established Ilham Tohti initiative because Ilham Tohti is in prison and not able to carry out his work. We seek his release, and we promote his ideas and vision worldwide, because we believe it is the only realistic way to solve the Uyghur problem and to establish stability and peace in our land. So we established Ilham Tohti initiative in Germany. It is a multinational organization open to anyone in the world, regardless of nationality, ethnicity, or religious affiliation, who share and support Ilham Tohti's ideas.
And do you manage to get some funding or some support?
Yes, we began to get some funding at the beginning, and we look to receive more, and we apply even for more, and we seek also fundings from European institutions, because China, with its regime and with its influence, is not so far to Europe, and it's getting closer and closer, and trying to exert its influence even to the European Union. And without stability, without peace, without harmony in China among the people, Chinese investment in Europe and Chinese influence in Europe will be also dangerous for the European people. We will try to explain that at the European Parliament, to the European institutions, and to the people of Europe, that the Chinese present government in its form is not as harmful as it looks to be. And 10 years ago, when we, all human rights defenders, tried to explain to democracy world, saying that China will not improve its human rights situation, no one believed us. And now that we see that there are people at higher level seeing that the last decade was waste of time, and there is no improvement in the human rights situation in China, and even it's getting worse.
Okay.
So.
Okay, that brings me to a question to you, Lucia Parrucci. I mean, you come to the European Parliament. Maybe you can tell us a bit what you're doing here. And I know last year you applied for the Sahara Price. for Ilham Tohti. Can you tell us a little more about this prize, and maybe also more generally, how are things going regarding the EU-China so-called dialogue?
Okay, so the Sakharov Prize is the Human Rights Award that the European Parliament gives once a year in December to human rights defenders. Last year, our three organizations worked a lot in order to nominate Ilham Tohti, and I would like to take this opportunity to thank MEP Ilham Tohti. Without him, we wouldn't have been here. And all the other 42 MEPs who supported and signed Ilham Tohti, and they are still working to keep his name in the EP agenda. The Sakharov Prize is really, really important because it gives the opportunity to those cases to be discussed among the top political level. And after the candidacy, even if somebody achieved the prize, even for the others, there is a really good outcome. After the candidacy in December, we had an urgency resolution on Ilham Tohti and the destruction of the Tibetan Larungar temples. Unfortunately, after 7 months, we are still waiting for a reply from the European institutions, which is pretty bad. But this moment is really, really important because last week we had the EU-China summit on Thursday and Friday, and soon after, Donald Tusk said we are going to have a human rights dialogue by the end of the week. What is a human rights dialogue? Of course, it's a meeting between the EU and China only focused on human rights, which it's pretty tricky because it has been established a long time ago, but the last time we had it, it was in 2015, and it was totally useless. When they had the summit last year, they said, okay, we're going to have another round of dialogue, but it never happened, so we don't know if we are going to have something like that. But as Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International, and UNPO said, there should be like a review of this dialogue, because right now it's useless. So if this case, if this dialogue is going to happen by the end of the month, we really hope that Europe and China will not use the opportunity to start releasing human rights defenders who are still on jail, like Ilham Tohti.
Okay. Tao Yaxue, I think you want to add a final thought to this.
Yeah. I want to continue about the EU-China human rights dialogue. I come from Washington, D.C. I also talked to congressmen and our officials there. The U.S.-China human rights dialogue and the EU human rights China dialogue is completely useless. Why? Because you have had the dialogue for over a decade and produced absolutely no result. And at the same time, the human rights conditions on the ground have been deteriorating. Everybody agrees that. So what I want to say, the last few words, the last time the Sakharov was awarded to someone from China is to Hu Jia in 2008. So now it's 9 years past. I think it's about time that the European Parliament gather its political will and give another Sakharov to someone from China. And we believe we're here to tell the MEPs that that person should be Ilham Tohti.
Thank you very much. I think that was the conclusion, so I don't need to add any more words to this. Thank you very much for coming, and goodbye.
Thank you.